Namaste, Bede, and namaste, everybody. Once again, we are going to continue our conversation on Vedanta and psychology in the light of Samidandaji's teachings. And here we are joined with Bede Clifford ji. And the topic for today is living in the light of Dharma. So, Bede, please take it away.
Okay, so I found you see, when you look at the West, when you look at the West and Western thinking and concerning psychology, what we have is we have this notion that emotional reactions are very, very important, okay? And the way to happiness is through satisfying psychological needs. This is a common belief, and what it does is that it doesn't really, this belief held, while I believe this, transformation of me as an individual will not be possible. Because, you see, we have to understand what we mean by, in Vedanta, what we mean by the psychological transformation of the individual, right? Or which is what they call in Vedanta the preparation necessary to understand the vision of Vedanta. And what's the vision of Vedanta? All that is here is God, which sounds really weird when you first hear it. But the thing is that you can't go straight to that. What has to happen is that in order for me to understand the vision of Vedanta, I have to undergo a psychological transformation. The question is, well, what is the nature of this transformation and what is necessary to bring it about?
So, Bede, you bring up an important point, and this is something we observe very often, right? That you said you can't go straight to that source. And earlier, just prior to our recording, you mentioned that Vedanta tends to be a little top-heavy, based on the final goal, the final answer to all of life's reality and such. So could you go into answering the question why you can't go straight to that? Because I think that is something that a lot of people end up missing.
Okay, so at the starting point of our life is ourselves as an individual living in the world. Okay, what they call in the West our existential situation. We're living in the world. Now, Swami Dayananda says that this living in the world, there are two modes of being living in the world. There are only two. There is a subjective mode of being living in the world, a subjective way of living in the world, and there's an objective way of living in the world. And he considered the emotional growth of the individual is a shift from being subjective to being objective. So what he was talking about was a transformation of ourselves as an individual who's living in the world. Now, the big question, well, what sort of transformation are we talking about? Do I kind of think of myself, okay, I've got to become a good or a nice person? Absolutely not. We're not talking about that. So we need to be clear on what this transformation is. Now, this is where Vedic psychology has transformed the way I see my life and the way I see psychology, philosophy, everything. And so how Swami Dayananda talked about it was he said what's absolutely necessary is emotional maturity. And he also said that normally speaking, we have the emotional life of a 6-year-old. We're emotionally immature, right? So can we just have a look at what we mean by emotion? When we look at emotion, we look at what E in Latin, E means out, to move. So emotions are what moves us. So as human beings, we're emotional. We are moved. The big question is, what are we moved by? Okay. What are we moved by? Now, according to Dayananda, essentially, mainly speaking, so what we have is we have the 4 strivings in Vedanta. Okay, so we're moved by the need for security. So when I see a bus coming towards me, I will, without choice, I will have an urge to move out of the way, because this movement to be secure is inbuilt in me as an individual. And it's extremely useful because it makes that I take care of myself in terms of protecting myself and making sure that my physical survival and the survival of the people around me. And then I'm also moved by pleasure. Do you know what I mean? Moved towards pleasure, which again is extremely important, because then I know that if I'm cold and it's uncomfortable, I'm going to put on a jacket, aren't I? Because it's unpleasant. So I'll be moved to take certain actions. You see how I'm constantly being moved, right? The problem being, though, is that there is objective security in the sense of food, clothing, and shelter. But then there's a strange thing called subjective maturity, security, where I want to feel secure as a person who is loved, who is admired, who is famous. Right? That's another. So I am moved towards things like that so that I can feel secure as a self.
And this movement is a function of psychological need.
Yeah, this is I'm moved psychologically. We're all, as individuals, we're always moved by emotion. The problem, and you see, the other thing too is that in the context of this movement towards security and pleasure, what happens is this is the context of our cognition, right? So in the context, in the context of security, I notice, that's a bit dangerous for me, or that's not good, right? So what moves us forms our context in which we see. So our cognition of the world is not context-free. It is always in the context of these four things: security, pleasure, Dharma, which we'll go into a minute, or God. Okay, now, but today we're only going to stick with Dharma. Okay, so as what Dayananda calls personality, which is my sense of identity that has been built up in me and that I seek to preserve. I want to, self-preservation is so important. Self-preservation, I'm not talking about preservation of the individual living in the world, which is objective. I need clothing, I need food. We're talking about this obsession with self and protecting self. Okay, so when, and this is the compulsiveness of human life. For example, we can have compulsions towards being famous, being approved of, to being better than other people. We can have compulsions in terms of pleasure, like the compulsions of people watching pornography or alcohol, or there's all sorts of compulsions that rule human beings. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so what happens is that here I'm moved by my subjective compulsions, which are built around self-preservation. Okay, what Swami Dayananda called it's infantile. We have the psychology of a 6-year-old. Now the question is, how do we actually, as an individual, when we're caught in these compulsions, and we all are, it doesn't matter whether the forms of the compulsions that take are different, but the compulsiveness of human life, the compulsiveness of ourselves as personality is universal. Okay, just how it's expressed is what's diverse. So we all suffer from the same problem. He called these binding desires. So the essential binding desire is self-preservation. Have you ever defended yourself because someone has said something you don't like?
Yeah.
Right. So we have this compulsion to defend ourselves. No one, the person hasn't hurt you physically or anything else, but you feel like whatever. And in the context of compulsive desire, this compulsive desires are craving, right? And it's craving for certain types of experience in order to make me happy. Okay, so fundamentally, he said this too, that for my insecurity, I seek securities. Okay, I'm not talking about objective securities, I'm talking about psychological securities. And he says you also seek pleasures to make me feel satisfied in myself. This explains the compulsions of sex, compulsions of alcohol, compulsions, it explains everything. Being famous, everything, right? So people are moved, you understand what I mean? They are being moved emotionally, right? By what he calls binding desires. You're bound to them, okay? And in the context of binding desires, you have cognitions. So for example, let's say I've got a binding desire to be liked and admired, and you say to me, Bede, I think you're a fantastic guy. Oh, really? Oh, that's fantastic. So my cognition of you is going to be what? Good or bad?
Positive.
And I'm going to think you're a great guy, right? Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's accurate. It is accurate in terms of, in the context of my binding desire, it's probably good. But, you know, what do you say next week? That I'm a jerk, right? So now I hate you, because binding desires, consciously or unconsciously, if you're a craver, you can't help but be a hater. Do you understand? Consciously or unconsciously, you can't help be a hater, and you can't help but be a fearer. And you also can't help but be a sadder, because you're not going to get what you want. So there's a tremendous misery, a psychological misery. And for Dayananda, the core of this misery is centered on myself. Insecurity, fear, saturated with fear, and saturated with self-dissatisfaction. I hate being what I'm like, and therefore I need external things to fix this up. And I need external things to fix the fear up. You with me so far?
Yeah.
So this is human life. This is what human life is like. This is what, it doesn't matter how glossy my look is, my good look, right? It doesn't matter when you meet people. It doesn't matter the face of innocence that is presented. What you at the core of the personality is tremendous fear, and tremendous self-dissatisfaction, of which most people are unconscious of, by the way. This is the real unconscious, not what Freud talked. This shows you what really is the unconscious, okay? So, and my whole human life is a defense against this. So my personality, the person I take myself to be, is my solution to make sure that I keep away from and don't experience fear and self-dissatisfaction. Are you with me?
Yes, BG, could you just add some more clarity on the unconscious of Freud and the one that we speak of in Vedanta, just a distinction?
Okay. Most people are not aware of their self-dissatisfaction or fear. For example, let's say, for example, I feel I'm a nice person, and I meet you, and let's say I've got my subtle forms of bragging, so I talk myself up a little bit with you and stuff like that. Do you think I'm aware of my inferiority? Absolutely not. And if I'm successful at getting what if I'm successful at functionally talking to you in a certain way and making you have an experience of me that is pleasant, I'll get the feedback that I am the person that I like to be, so I'll feel good. But I'm not, what's happened is notice how even my bragging and my obsession of impressing you is a defense against that feeling of I hate being what I'm like.
Right.
But that's not normally, that's not there. Have you seen people fall rapturously in love?
Yeah.
Right? It's a transient psychosis, but in the sense that it defends me against this self-dissatisfaction and fear that I'm not aware of. Do you think the arrogant person is aware of his inferiority? Absolutely not. Right? Or the person who is critical of other people and attacking other people and saying, oh God, people are stupid. Do you think he's aware of his guilt?
So
his self-hatred?
How would you explain certain circumstances where a person knows, like, for example, you're prone to telling lies, or you're prone to
that's the light of Dharma.
But what I mean is that they are kind of somewhat aware of it, and yet they cannot control themselves in doing it. It's kind of like a meta awareness without actually being able to stop yourself.
They're aware of it, but it does not to the degree that they're moved to do anything different. Okay, so they're aware, but they haven't come under the sway of Dharma. When you come under the sway of Dharma, you get moved in a different direction.
So does that mean that there has to be a threshold beyond the point when?
Because here you're caught in this enclosure, and if the light of Dharma doesn't come in, you will not be lifted out. That's a fact.
Okay.
Okay. I I remember once what happened was I was heavily involved with alcohol, right? I haven't touched alcohol for 26 years. And what happened was, I come home and I was drinking, and my son wanted to engage me. He says, "Oh, Dad, do you want to play chess?" "No, I'm too tired," right? And then what happened was, it was very interesting. The light of Dharma came in as a revealing light and said, this is extremely selfish and wrong. Now, this was quite extraordinary, really, because the moment before I was feeling very right. You see, when you're caught up in subjectivity, you feel right? You don't. And then this light came in. Grace. This is the grace. This is. See how Hannah Dyananda says that Ishvara is in our hearts as Dharma, right? This light come in that just simply revealed that how I was living and what I was like was wrong. And what it arose in me was regret and remorse. Now, regret and remorse are not negative. I'm not talking about self-hatred. Regret and remorse, we're moved to correct our behavior. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Regret and remorse are not negative.
Would you call that guilt?
No, I wouldn't actually call that guilt. So I keep guilt being as self-hatred, but regret and remorse is a move. See, guilt is I make myself as an object and I go, I hate myself because I've done that. Right? I'm a self that I hate. Regret and remorse says I've just done something and acted in a way that is wrong. Or that I'm acting wrongly. Now, this is when we, and as it happened after a month, I stopped drinking alcohol, right? But what I'm saying is that it's only by when we're moved by the light of Dharma, that's what lifts us out of being moved from binding desires. Now, I'll explain this a bit more. Now, Swami Dayananda, you see, binding desires, the core of the binding desires is ourselves as personality, right? In that book, Action and Reaction, he made a distinction between personality and person, didn't he?
So when you say person, you're referring to the basic person as you speak of.
Yes. Okay. So when we're talking about personality, we're talking about the built-in reactions, a sense of identity centered on me, right? Whereas the simple basic person is the simple conscious person, the person who can be conscious, right? Now, he said a very interesting thing. He said the dynamic form, that movement again, the dynamic form of the basic person is love and care. Now, if we translate that into the English vernacular, which I like to do, right? Love is this. Have you noticed that we as a human being have an innate movement to associate with other people in a harmonious, cooperative, and helpful way? Have you noticed that?
Yes.
If we didn't have that, if we weren't moved by that, I would not have felt, for example, I wouldn't have felt the regret and remorse about how I treated my son. Right? So in the context of that movement, cognition is possible. Objective cognition, in the sense of what I'm doing, the manner I talk to him, this is just unacceptable, right? But in the context of my binding desire, it feels right. Do you see the two different kind of lives? Right. So what happens with Dharma? Dharma is the movement towards, like, so you have this desire to which you can call love. You want to live in harmony and cooperatively and productively with other human beings. Now, when you fall away from Dharma, have you noticed that to the degree you fall away from that feeling of goodwill towards others, it's goodwill. You actually will the best for them. Have you ever been filled with ill will, Prashant?
Filled with?
Ill will.
Yeah.
So we can fall away from Dharma, and that manifests as ill will, where we become attacking or hating, right? Now, it doesn't matter how we just, have you ever experienced hatred for other people and feeling right and virtuous about it?
Yeah.
It's sick. It's just completely off the wall. But so what happens is, but when I'm moved by goodwill, when I want to act cooperatively, harmoniously, and happily with other human beings, and I want to have a relationship with other human beings in which there's no kind of attacking or hostility or whatever, and I'm moved by that. Do you see how I'm now being governed not by binding desires, but governed by goodwill or by Dharma?
Correct. So that
Dharma,
brings us to a basic question, Bede, which is, you mentioned that love and care is the foundational basis of the simple person. Then the question is, why are love and care the foundations?
well, because inherently, see, this is Dharmananda's psychology. The core, we're not just this I'm awareness. You know, as an individual basic person, I am moved towards being in the world in a loving way. And I'm also moved to being in the world in a caring way. Right? Now, when I'm being moved by love and care or goodwill and concern, that is the only thing that lifts me out of the binding desires. Being caught up in the binding desires.
Yeah. So the question is, why are we pulled towards love and care, and why does that give us some relative freedom when we act lovingly and caringly?
Okay, it goes back to the Vedic psychology of the strivings. Love and care, the striving for Dharma is a core, for Dharmananda, is the core striving for the individual. This is the core striving. This is where Western psychology is wrong. You know how we talk about psychological needs? We have a need to be loving and caring. And you know how Dharmananda says, if you look after Dharma, Dharma looks after you.
Okay.
I know that when I am governed by goodwill, what it does is it protects me, because it's the basis of it becomes the basis of my conduct in relation to other people, the basis of right conduct, and caring is the basis for right conduct. So you don't screw people over. You're honest. You don't harm people. Right? Now, Swami Dayananda said a very interesting thing. When your actions conform to these core strivings, your understanding, your knowledge of what's right and wrong. When you as an individual, when your actions are conformed to these basic, he says you are together as a person. If they don't conform to that, there's a rupture in you as a person. Now, this is a profoundly different thing from Western psychology. For Dayananda, the problem of a human being is an ethical problem with a profound psychological impact. But the psychological impact, the unhappiness, is not the problem. The problem is I have not learned to live a life of Dharma. In other words, I'm not living under the light of Dharma. I'm not being governed by Dharma. Dharma obtains in you not as some theoretical external thing you follow. Dharma obtains in you as a movement. You are moved emotionally. What he calls, you want to do what you need to do. All right? Now, he defines that as maturity, emotional maturity. Can you see how you're moved emotionally? But the thing is, you are moved to live in a world where you are responding to what he calls the needful. You're not dealing with preservation of a self. You are dealing with a responsiveness that produces a harmonious life with other people. But not only that, what's unique, and he's like similar to Socrates in this way. If you live a right life, you become right in yourself. if you don't live a right life, you can't be right in yourself. Does that make sense? This is a beautiful teaching. Now, so we have this problem. Here I am. My starting point is I'm caught up in binding desires. In other words, I'm enclosed in personality, right? And I need to make a movement from here to here, to being moved by binding desires, to being moved by Dharma. Are we clear on that so far?
Yeah.
Right. Now, this brings us to a very interesting point. So how do we go about bringing about this emotional growth? Right? Now, this is the whole purpose of karma yoga. This is, without karma yoga, you can't do this. Right? It doesn't matter if I sit there and I go, yep, I'm Satchitananda. That's my real nature. Well, okay, whoop-de-dee-doo-dee-dum. Because right at the moment you're pissed off with your spouse and you want to give them a serve. You want to be hostile or critical.
So one thing that I've noticed, okay, amongst even my peers and fellow students of Vedanta or people I interact with on the subject, everybody is Brahman only when it comes to doing their duties. But once it comes to, having done your duty towards your culture, towards your tradition, it could be towards family, it could be towards anything. That's when they say, okay, I'm Brahman, I'm free from all duties, I'm free from my responsibilities, I'm untouched, I'm Satchidananda, the self. But when it comes to, say, watching a movie or going to a restaurant or, just having a nervous meltdown, that's when you lose your Brahmatva. So it's a form of escapism. Would you put it that way?
Yes. It's what Freud called a reaction formation. In other words, if I study Vedanta to improve my view of myself, which will help my insecurity and fear, insecurity and self-dissatisfaction, that is not the purpose of Vedanta. You see, for Swami Dayananda, the yoga of objectivity is not trying to be happy. He thought that trying to be happy was based on the fact that you're unhappy. And happiness has to be a natural consequence. So when I live a life of Dharma, which is extremely difficult, I think, right? When I live a life of Dharma and I'm engaged in a life of Dharma, notice I'm not trying to improve myself, but I'm definitely trying to improve my conduct.
Right.
So I'm not trying to improve a self. I'm not doing it to be a good look. Right? So the whole the whole thing too is that just because there's the total vision that there is only the presence of God here, right? That's the absolute vision, right? That does not deny the fact the idea that I suddenly disappear as an individual. Swami Dayananda still operated as an individual. That's just not true. It's just crazy stuff, right? So what's necessary is an understanding, first of all. What he says is you have to, it's not the question of preaching right and wrong. He says you have to show the value of right and wrong.
Right.
The value. Now, this is what we're doing now. We're saying, okay, if you want to be happy, if you want to have a sense of rightness within yourself, this sense of rightness is going to be completely determined by how you live in the world.
So, BG, how do you cultivate that value?
Right. Okay. So first of all, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, you can only will what you ascertain as good. So unless you see something as good, you don't have an inclination. Your will is governed by what you think is good.
Right.
But that's just a rule. It's hardwired. Okay. Swami Dayananda says you only have an inclination towards what you value, which is what you see as good. Right. So the first starting point is knowledge. Right. So unless I come to an understanding that the total emphasis has to be my daily, the way I am relating in the world moment by moment, to other people and to duties, to what needs to be done. Unless I actually understand that what Dharma is, which is the teaching of Swami Dayananda, what it is, right? So So now when I first start, I recognize, okay, I might be caught up in these binding desires, but I can really see that this is truly good.
Right.
That I need to live in harmony with other people. And I need, through caring, bring the value that's needed each moment into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very active. Does that make sense? This is no wimpy kind of, I'm just all blissed out stuff, you know, none of that nonsense, right? So what's my starting point? My starting point is examination of my life, the way I am living, which is a verb, to do, the way I'm living in the light of Dharma. Right? Now, you see, at the beginning, what the end that we're seeking is emotional maturity. In other words, where we're spontaneously moved by Dharma. Is that true?
Yeah.
And you'll have had moments of, we all have moments of being spontaneously, we actually feel goodwill. And from that goodwill, we don't say or do anything that hurts other people. You notice that?
Yeah.
Even if they're being difficult, you know, okay, so you understand. So when you understand that your solution is in conforming your acts in such a way that you come together as a person, in other words, you live in the light of Dharma. So the first thing is this, is that, and this helped me a great deal. If I ever are caught in ill will towards another person, I've fallen away from goodwill. Right?
Yes.
And you see, if you look at the wider picture too, when you look at the world, Prashant, and you see the injustice and the hatred and disparity of wealth and all of that stuff, and the starving millions and all that stuff, we ask the question, what's the cause of that? What is the cause? It's an absence of goodwill. The problem of the world exists in my heart, in the sense of what my heart, meaning what moves me. So when I fall away from goodwill, I notice I become hateful and attacking, right, and resentful. When I fall away from caring, I notice two things. I notice I'm indifferent to the suffering of others, first of all, and then I'm ruthless. So when we talk about a religious life, we're talking about a way of living. I think you guys call it Sanata Dharma, don't you?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a way of living that is the solution to the world's problem. Mm-hmm. But I have to acknowledge the fact that the world's problem that I look at out there exists in my heart. And I need to resolve the world's problem as it exists in me. That's real responsibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then I can't go into this virtue signaling of, you know, I'm look at those evil, horrible people out there.
Right.
And notice how when I'm saying, look at those evil, horrible people, I'm full of hatred and ill will, and I feel right.
Correct.
Right? So it starts with, at the beginning, we can only, we look at, and consciously and deliberately, now this is where Swami Dayananda is different than a lot of other people. Mm-hmm. We can all go, you just be loving, it's just natural and all that stuff. No, it's not natural. Okay, it's not natural. It's not natural for human beings to be loving. That's just nonsense. Okay, that's just nonsense. So what Swami Dayananda says, you have to live a conscious and deliberate life. Have you heard him say that?
Yeah.
It has to be conscious and deliberate in the light of Dharma. So it's not me trying to be a good person. It's, I already have ascertained, even though I'm caught up in myself and my binding desires, I've ascertained that the way to live my life is to live from a goodwill and concern, or love and care. Now, at the beginning, what happens is you live by those two things. Mm-hmm. You live by them. You don't necessarily live from them. Yeah. That's what he means by an assimilated value, is when you live from them, right? Now, so what happens is this, and this is an extremely arduous and difficult practice. In other words, have you ever been caught up in emotional reaction, and despite being emotional, so because I'm upset with my spouse, now I have to first of all accept the reaction, agreed? Because there's no control over that. And by the way, psychological reactions to Dayananda are not important. They're facts to be accepted. They're like the weather. So I'm upset about my spouse. So we're not going into this Western thing that our feelings are so important. They're not important, right? The feelings of love and concern are important, but our feelings of hatred and anxiety, and they're not actually that important, right? They seem to be, but they're not. So, but in spite of the fact that I don't feel kind, that I have an urge to act in an unkind way, right? Because, and the urge for that, by the way, is self-preservation, right? It's self-protective, right? So instead of acting in a self-protective way, I can still, in terms of my conduct, can I still say and do a kind thing?
Yeah.
Right. So what happens so when I'm looking at my actual living as a human being in the world, it consists of what I say and do and how I say and do it. Is that true?
Yes. So here's the question here.
Yep.
So what the premise that we formed is that when you act caringly and lovingly, ultimately you invite a lot of peace and just a peace of mind and emotional maturity in your own life, because now you are at ease with yourself and you don't have that sense of remorse, regret, guilt, none of that, because you've acted in accordance to dharma, and you have basically you want to do the things that you need to do, and therefore you are congruent with nature, with the order, with dharma, with Ishvara. But now, how do you explain? Of course, there's an explanation for this, but it's worth going into some depth about. Let's say I'm a complete narcissist, and I believe that this is a dog eat dog world, and I can get away with doing anything because ultimately, that's survival of the fittest, and I can hurt some people, I can rob people, I can do all sorts of nonsense just to keep myself comfortable.
This person is not like this. There's nothing we can do about that.
But can this person simultaneously claim that they are at peace with themselves in spite?
Absolutely. No. Because of course they claim that they're being at peace with themselves, right? Dayananda was quite clear that unless you're peaceful with the environment, you're not peaceful with yourself. So that's not true. So
when they make these claims, it's self-deception, you would call it?
If they are genuinely moved by Dharma, they are freed from self-concern, their attention is actually out on doing the needful, and they're coming into harmony with other people, yes. But if they have a self-ideal, I'm a loving, wonderful, spiritual person, right? But their daily acts are not there. But again, we have to use Vedanta for ourselves only. Remember?
So I'm just trying to get at a different thing, because over here, the way we interpret Dharma, let's say there's somebody who's a vegetarian, for example, right? Because they have a value for ahimsa, and they don't want to cause pain and violence to any living creature because they don't want to be hurt themselves. Let's say I have cultivated a value where I don't think that animals possess life whatsoever, and they are for my serving, and therefore I have a right and dominion over the animal kingdom, and I can do whatever I want, right? That's an example. Or I can cause pain to others because I'm just born into the world, and this is again the way evolution has turned out. And so I have I've cultivated the value to do what I think is right, but it could be a completely warped set of values. So let's take an extreme example such as Hitler. Now, without doing too much of a psychoanalysis, to some degree, every crazy dictator has an idealistic view of the world where they think that they are making things better than they are before they touch those things, right? So they've
got their notions of what good is,
right. And so, and if they are trying to abide by those notions and they feel good at the end of the day that I've done,
their will be governed by what they ascertain as good. So unless there is, this is why Dayananda says Vedanta starts with knowledge. Right. Unless, he says, you can only be aware of what you know. So if I don't discover the value of living a dharmic life, there is no hope for me. Right? So that's just basically because, and we must also, we need to apply it to ourselves, because, and we need to do it on a moment by moment basis. You know, imagine like an hourglass.
Right.
Because, so what happens is, going back, so if the prerequisite is this, if I do not see living a dharmic life as good, I will not be inclined towards it, and there's no possibility of me living a life of Dharma.
And
I might conform to the social mores and be nice and polite and do all of that stuff and whatever, but it is not living a life of Dharma. Living a life of Dharma is extremely difficult, I think.
so I guess what I'm trying to get at is, how do we decipher the template of what it means to live a dharmic life? Because there are social mores, and there are, even within every society.
No, we make a start. Can we go back to making a start?
Right.
So what happens is this. The key is this. Have you noticed that sometimes that you fall away from goodwill and you act from antagonism or attacking?
Yeah.
Have you ever also noticed that sometimes in terms of what needs to be done, the helpful and constructive thing done in terms of caring, you don't do?
Yeah.
Right. They are the two things that you need to look for. Right. They are the two, because they don't lie, do they? I mean, I can say, well, I'm such a Tananda and I'm already, I'm fine, right? But the fact of the matter is, once I keep what Dayananda calls committing myself to a life of Dharma, committing myself. Now, once I do that, what's going to happen is this: a very unpleasant thing is going to happen in a funny sense. You're going to notice how easy it is for you to act in a destructive or a hostile manner towards other people.
So you become more sensitive to your...
Absolutely. That's the big, in the light, because Dharma is an illuminating light.
Right.
It's without Dharma, without that movement towards kindness and constructiveness towards other people, you won't notice the hostility. Like with my son, I didn't notice it until after I'd done it.
So the way I kind of analogize this is, if you have a lake, then the water level starts coming down and you start seeing those rocks and the stones and everything jutting out. So you become more kind of alert to... You got
to become aware of the dark side.
Right, exactly.
Now, no one wants that because of a psychological idealized picture of themselves. They want to be right.
Now, Bede, you touched upon something very interesting, which I don't want to segue too much from the main thread over here. But you spoke about the dark side. And then there are certain arguments about how one has to rein in the dark side and not completely dispose of it. So let's say if I have a certain nature which is very belligerent or temperamental or whatever, rather than deny that nature or to abolish it altogether or negate it, somehow to integrate it into your personality and to use it as a force for good. Is that something that you believe in, integrating the...
No. I don't believe that Jungian notion. No.
Okay.
No. Now, I'll explain why, right?
Yeah.
The thing is I don't think the problem, how Einstein said the problem can never be solved at the level of the problem is.
Yeah.
Okay. We're talking about leaving behind self-preservation and all of that stuff and coming under the sway of Dharma. Right? So, first of all, we need to become aware of the dark side. That's absolutely important. Do you know what I mean? In the sense that, and this is two things. I notice that I'm talking harshly. I notice that I'm talking unkindly or tersely, right? So it's still the same content. It's still hate, even though the spectrum is different, right? So I first of all become very acutely aware of the fact of when I act unkindly, when I'm looking at human beings in a hateful way, which I do when I get involved with politics, by the way, that when I get into the political thing, I become hateful. So I actually keep a distance from it these days, right? Now, also I become aware of the fact that, I really need to be doing the dishes now. It would be good for me to do this. This is what's needed. So basically, Dayananda called this, by the way, surrender to the Lord. Right. This is the real surrender. So I'm constantly confronted with the fact of falling away from love and falling away from care. So I become indifferent and ruthless.
Right.
Now, so what happens is now this is where the psychological process begins to happen with Karma Yoga. So first of all, can you see that in terms of my conduct, I'm coming into harmony with the environment, thereby becoming in harmony with myself.
Yeah.
But in another way, I'm not. In another way, what's going to happen is the so-called unconscious is going to now start to rear its head. Because you see, let's say, for example, I have a need to be loved and liked and admired, and you criticize me, right?
Just one quick point. When you speak of the unconscious, am I understanding it correctly that you mean those past samskaras and the past impressions?
No, I don't know. I actually mean, I don't believe that we're aware of the depth of fear that we have, because being cut off from God, like in our Western scriptures, when you're cut off from the vine, cut off from the life, you're withering. Being cut off from reality or God necessitates that we're incredibly fearful and we hate ourselves.
Right.
Don't understand. We can't. That's what remains unconscious, and that's what we're afraid of.
And it is unconscious because we're afraid of it, or we're afraid of it?
No, because we have a personality structure which has been built up as a defense against it.
Okay, so it shields us from
personality, from even getting anywhere near it. Have you ever noticed that when you're arguing with your spouse, you think that you're trying to deal with her, but in actual fact, she said or done something, and what's happened is the self-hatred become apparent, and then you try and deal with it externally.
Yeah.
So we don't want to get near this. Okay. We don't want to get near what Swami Dayananda calls the fundamental problem. However, a life of karma yoga will make us get near it, which I'm going to explain now.
Yeah, please.
Right now. So what happens is, let's say that I feel inadequate. I hate, who likes the feeling of inadequacy? Nobody. So they want to get that. There's a movement away from it. Is that true?
Yeah.
So let's say that I noticed that I subtly brag, which is what I didn't notice when I started doing this. I noticed that I had all these different ways I could sort of impress others, or try to impress others. Whether I impress them, doesn't matter, right? So then I thought, okay, I'm not going to do this. Okay, I'm not going to do this. Now this is where it gets interesting. You know how Swami Dayananda says the purpose of karma yoga is to bring you to yourself, bring you back to yourself?
Yes.
So what happens is I stop bragging, and now I'm feeling a bit diminished. Feeling a bit diminished. Right? Okay. In other words, I'm brought back to myself as I am. Now, this is where, without the understanding of Ishvara, this is where, you know how he talks about resolving the ego or personality into Ishvara?
Yeah.
This is your two-pronged thing. I live a life of Dharma, which will bring me back to myself. But what's going to happen is all my fears and my self-hatred is going to start to become more evident.
Right.
Because I'm no longer defending myself. So I'm actually being brought back to the core of the problem, aren't I? Notice how he said that the purpose of karma yoga is the neutralization of binding desires.
Yeah.
So I've got a binding desire to brag. But what's the psychological misery behind the binding desire? Inadequacy. So what we need to do now is we need to resolve that inadequacy, not try and deal with the binding desire.
Right.
There's no point in going, I've got to get rid of the binding desire, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So here I am, I'm not bragging, but I'm with myself, and it just feels horrible. Now, the great thing, because of his understanding, which we've gone in other classes, but the thing is that we remain with ourselves as we are in Ishvara's lap, and we let ourselves be resolved into Ishvara as that, as that inadequacy. So what happens is, through our understanding of God, as unfolded by Swami Dayananda, we can resolve this as it comes up, the fear and the self-hatred, which is always there.
Right.
As it comes up, we resolve it into Ishvara. If you just have Dharma only without an understanding of God, it's very difficult, because you're not going to neutralize the binding desire. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we need, so what happens then is that here I am, I've stopped bragging, and I'm feeling a little bit whatever, and then I come to God as I am, and I go, okay, I place myself in his hands and I wait, right? as I become more familiar with this, notice how I'm resolving what happens is that in Ishvara, I'm lifted out of identification with fear and insecurity.
Yeah.
And I achieve a point which he calls being relaxed in the lap of Ishvara.
Yeah.
And I do this daily, right? Because what I'm doing is, this is what transforms us psychologically, because it neutralizes the bone desire. I still might like to be liked, but it's what he calls snake without fangs.
So
I'm not, yeah.
So I have a question here. So you distinguish between binding desires and desires based on how Swamiji explains it. Binding desires and non-binding desires.
Yep.
So is it a steady transition? Are you kind of like defanging the snake slowly, bit at a time, or is there like a binary switch between one to the other? Or do you see it as a gradual process of diminishment?
Well, no, it's on a moment-by-moment basis, is either one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But as time goes by, of course, because what happens is, imagine this tremendous fear and self-dissatisfaction. It comes up and it's resolved, and it comes up and it's resolved, and it comes up and it's resolved.
Right.
That, of course, is going to bring you more and more to emotional maturity, in the sense that where it was once extremely important for you to look good in front of other people, it becomes less important.
Correct.
Right. So that's what this emotional growth is. Right. So, but you can't do it without God. This whole idea.
So that's a very good point to raise, BG. And I have another question there. So
yeah,
let's say there are instances when I feel that I have grown in my emotional maturity. I have less need to feel validated by others. So there's a positive change over there. You know, you're kind of more at home with yourself, and you can do without several things in your life that you were completely attached to that you couldn't do without. And then there are instances in life when it could be a trigger, it could be an event, it could be an occasion, whatever it may be, where suddenly you feel that you're back to square one. So in some sense, would it be the right thing to do when you are thinking objectively that let me create these trigger events for myself before they catch me unawares?
Well, but just bear in mind, first of all, the so-called coming back to where you were, right? The thing is that understanding of how to live rightly is an understanding, agreed?
Right.
And it grows. And you can fall away from it. That's also true.
Right.
So you haven't, at that very moment, you see, first of all, falling away it's got nothing to do with emotional reactions.
Yeah.
You can feel like you've made no project. That's true, right? But because we're no longer interested in how we are doing as a self, we're interested in being alive to facts and responding to those facts in the best possible way. That's become our orientation. We're no longer so much concerned with self-concern.
Right.
What happens is, on a moment-by-moment basis, I see I've done wrong, and then I correct it. Right. I see I've done wrong, I've corrected. I see, and the wrongness will always be the two things: either falling away from goodwill and acting in a way that's not right towards other people, or a failure to do what is needful that's presented to you to be done.
Where does fear account for this? So, for example, let's say I am fearful of something where it's not so much a matter of goodwill or not doing what is to be done. Let's say somebody has a fear of addressing an audience, a live audience, or somebody has a fear of snakes. I personally don't like scorpions. So let's say, would it be a good idea for us to invite these unpleasant situations in our life when we are in control of it, as opposed to be taken off guard? So let's say, if I hypothetically I don't like snakes, then I should maybe go and seek out a snake charmer where I know that the snake has been defanged, and so I can just caress it and I can kind of like come to terms with it.
Well, they've worked out, like psychologists have certain methods to do with that, but you're talking there about functional living, right?
Right. Or even even to that point, even the thing about inadequacy. So let's say, when you are having a sort of a careless argument with your spouse, and you both fling a few words at each other, and you kind of end up regretting the things you've said. as opposed to, because it's very difficult to apologize in the moment, or it's very difficult to kind of
Of
like,
course, but you apologize after. Yes, of course.
right. So that's what I meant. So does it always help that once you're objective and you've given it time and reflection, it's better to go face that situation or face the fear or face whatever it
Oh,
is.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Because what you're doing is, okay, it's not a straight line. Emotional maturity is not a straight line. What we do is we want to grow out of our infantile reactions and come under the sway of Dharma. So we're growing out of it.
Right.
You can't grow out of it unless you actually practice Dharma.
Right.
And you also can't, and as you practice Dharma, what's going to happen is, because you're no longer acting defensively, what's going to happen is the fear and the insecurity is going to become clearer.
Is that fear in a general sense, or fear with respect to specificity?
Well, no. Well, get this. You see, unlike Western psychology, Swami Dayananda didn't look at it as, say, anxiety, as fear, as hostility, or whatever. He looked at it as one problem. So the one problem is, I'm feeling fear, and I'm feeling they're the same. The fear and the self-dissatisfaction are the same. So it's the core problem. So what I'm interested in doing is, as it arises in my life moment by moment, I go to Ishvara with it. Right. As it appears. I don't try and stir it up. I don't try and fix it up. And let's say I'm sitting with myself and I feel a little bit, right? And I go, oh. And then I just simply remain with myself, and I leave. Because you know how the Hindu religion is quite interesting in this regard. For them, and I won't use Satchitananda, I'll use English vernacular if you don't mind. The life, light, and fullness that is God is abidingly present and embracing you at all times. Right. That's the fundamental premise. When we come to an appreciation of that fact, that's when we awaken to the presence of Ishvara. It's a very important thing. Because here I am, I notice I'm upset. I go, oh, okay, I'm upset. Okay, I'll leave it in God's hands. So I just go quiet. I don't try and fight myself. I don't try and figure myself out or anything like that. I just simply remain with myself as I am, and I seek to become aware of the presence of God. Right. And the presence of God, as far as Swami Dayananda, is not away from what I'm like. Yeah. But I don't. So I'm very sensitive to when I'm in friction. You know, that friction feeling, right? Because you know how in Karma Yoga they talk about graceful acceptance, which is the one attitude that I meet everything. Right? It's the one attitude I can abide in. And you know how he says that attitude of acceptance is born out of our understanding of Ishvara? Yes. That relaxed, accepting attitude cannot be born unless you understand what Ishvara is. Unless you awaken to the presence of Ishvara, it's going to be very difficult. That's why Vedanta is to do with knowledge, right? So on a moment, I'm not trying to fix the Bede project. I'm only interested in moment by moment, like an hourglass. Yeah. I notice right now I'm upset. Great. Now I've got a starting point. Now, from there, I remain with myself. I come to God, place myself in his hands as I am, and I wait. Right. And then I'll find that I'll be lifted out of, and I'll become what he calls relaxed in the lap of Ishvara, which is an attitude, which is a psychophysical attitude. It's a feeling of myself as an individual. Right. Every time I fall away from that because I'm in friction with other people, I'm in friction with myself, or I'm in friction in the world, that's my starting point with Karma Yoga. Right. So we're not trying to improve ourselves. What we're doing is we're only interested in being alive to what he calls alive to facts. Right. He says another thing. He says, you're awake to the moment by being yourself. Correct. So if I have to break this into a couple of steps, right? So the wrong approach would be that, let's say if I feel fearful, instead of kind of, inflicting myself to further pain that, oh, how can I be afraid? And, I'm supposed to be strong, I'm supposed to be this and that. You acknowledge the emotion that, okay, there is fear.
And I offer
Yeah.
this fear to Ishvara because it is an objective fact. It is something that I'm able to perceive that it is a fact.
I come to God as myself, as this fearful person. Yeah.
Right. And then once you offer that emotion, whatever it may be, to Ishvara, and then you tend to see yourself becoming more objective in that very moment of offering, right?
And because you're filled with the presence of reality, you're lifted out of the subjectivity. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
The presence of reality is the only thing that lifts you out of subjectivity.
And each time you accept this,
Yep.
the grip that the emotion has, it becomes lesser and lesser over time until the point when it completely fades away.
Yes. But you're not interested in that. You're only interested in resolving it moment by moment.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
see, so what happens is being accepting or graceful acceptance or resting in the lap of Ishvara, whatever you want to call it, that puts you in the world as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Responding in the light of Dharma keeps you in harmony with the world as it is. So this is what sameness means. So me being accepting of what's happening, okay, look at that. I've done something. I've talked harshly. I accept that fact. I've talked harshly.
Right.
I'm feeling inferior. I accept that fact. I'm feeling inferior. There's no denial. For Dayananda, he says what's important is to be alive to facts, not to try to be a good person. Do you see the difference?
Right.
So we're not trying to be, this isn't self-improvement.
Mm-hmm.
This is learning to live a life of acceptance and beneficial responsiveness.
Right.
Without that as a human being, we don't change.
Yeah.
But our difficulty is this. Everybody has an idealized vision of themselves, a version of themselves they like. Right? Now, the reason that they want to be this person is because it's the ultimate good in the sense that it'll protect them from the fear and insecurity. This is why human vanity is so tenacious.
Right.
It's not because it's immoral. It's just that it has a defensive function.
Yeah.
When you live a life of Dharma, you're going to have that lovely picture of yourself assaulted, because you're going to see yourself acting unkindly. You're going to see yourself, the fact your disposition to be hostile. You're going to see yourself where you're negligent and you don't do what you need to do.
Right.
Right. So this is a real surrender. This is without God, without the understanding of God, because the whole purpose of this is when we look at karma yoga. St. Augustine in our Western tradition had this prayer. Thou hast made us for yourself, O Lord, and we are restless until we rest in thee. So we have this fourth striving, this longing for the absolute.
Right.
And it's only in the context of this will we be willing to practice karma yoga.
Correct.
Because
would it also be correct to say, as you say, that because the basic striving of Dharma is also essentially the nature of Ishvara, not at the absolute level, but at the level of the reality we exist. Therefore,
that's
there
very
is
interesting.
that.
Well, what Dayananda says, for example, when you're living a life of Dharma, Ishvara makes the decisions.
Right.
In other words, basically, God's life obtains in the world as your life.
Right. Right.
Right? And it's given. It's given. It's not like I'm now being a holy spiritual person.
Correct. Because
it has nothing to
self as a personality.
That's personality. And there's nothing worse than spiritual vanity.
Yeah.
There's nothing, but it's nothing more dangerous.
Yeah.
Because let's say, imagine I have this feeling that I'm more spiritually wise than other people. Right? That's self-objectification, isn't it? I've got a self that's more spiritually wise than the other selves.
Right.
It's subjectivity.
Yeah, it's a savior complex as well, because then you start thinking that you are responsible for other people's well-being and such.
All of that, and also you move away from the fact that the world's problem, the real world's problem as it exists in you, and you need to resolve it there.
Correct.
Do you see what I mean? So when we're talking about Swami Dayananda has a magnificent principle. He says, everything is given. Everything. So the very fact that I want to act kindly, that's given. That's grace. That impulse in me that moves me to act kindly or moves me to act in a concernful way, that's given. Even my binding desires are given.
Right.
Given that I'm cut off from reality, this is what I'm going to be involved in. So karma yoga is not, it doesn't involve spiritual embellishment of a self that feels good about itself because it's so spiritual.
Yeah.
In fact, what you'll really have is gratitude.
Yeah.
If anything, does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
the fact that, and also the more you see through yourself and the more you see through your own stuff, the less critical and harsh you'll be about others, because you'll realize that their problem is your problem. The form might be different, but the content is the same.
Right. Very true. It's beautiful. So BG, this has been such a fantastic, as always, it's very eye-opening, and the things that you talk about invariably draw you closer to Ishvara and to your fundamental basic nature. And that's always a great thing. I've received nothing but good feedback for these sessions. So we should keep these going for a while.
Okay. Lovely to talk to you again, Prashant.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to the next one. We'll figure something out. Thanks so much,
Okay.
BG. This has been great. And maybe what I could do for next time around is have a few other people kind of watching it live, and if they have any questions, we could have a Q&A session at the end.
No worries. Yep, that'll be good.
Wonderful. Thank you, BG. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnaat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.